Congratulations for making it all the way to June 11. I can't believe we're here already. And thank you for joining us for the CAI California Apprenticeship Initiative webinar for this month of June, where we are going to be focusing on apprenticeship partnerships with the public sector. And I realize that we have the wrong title up. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. But our conversation is going to be around the apprenticeship partnerships with the public sector, which COVID is certainly having an impact on. So perhaps the title is also deft and relevant. So one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation is really because approximately 15% of the workforce in California is in federal, state, and local government. And so I'm really excited to launch into this conversation. It's a sector of our economy that is often not touched on very frequently, and we want to make sure to give it extra precedence. Eduardo, would you mind advancing the slide for me first? I want to give folks a little bit of housekeeping overview, especially for anybody who is unfamiliar with Zoom, or frankly, if you're just at a loss of exactly which platform you're using today versus any other day. So for Zoom, you do have audio controls that give you the option to toggle between computer or audio or a call-in number. If you're having connectivity issues, especially on the audio side with either of those, you certainly can use those. To do so, if you hover your mouse over the slides on the far left side, you should have the image of either an old phone headset if you're on the phone, or a microphone. Next to that is a caret, an upward pointing caret, and if you select that, that'll give you options to swap between the two, and we'll bring up a phone number and meeting ID for you to use to connect your phone. We do have chat, of course. Chat is also located along the same banner. You can use chat to ask questions, make comments, engage with others during the webinar. We encourage you to drop questions to the participants and the to the panelists who are presenting today as we discuss the topic around public sector apprenticeships. If we don't have, if the question is not answered during the presentation itself, we will log them and make sure that we have a chance to touch on them at the end of the presentation or in follow-up on the CAI Hub after the webinar as well. So please feel free to make sure to use the chat and get your questions answered. And then if you have any technical issues or anything like that, you can flag us down. The easiest way is to call attention by raising your hand. You can also ping one of the leads. That can be me or my colleague Mahika, who is on the line and is a co-host, or my colleague Eduardo as well, may be able to help out. Mahika would be your best first bet if you're having any sort of technical issues. Click on the participants list, and then if you find her, you can send her a message directly. Let's move forward, and I'll provide a little bit of introduction. So folks who are unfamiliar with my voice, I am Caleb Van Docto. I'm an associate with Social Policy Research. I am part of the technical assistance team for the California Apprenticeship Initiative. We work in tandem with the Foundation for California Community Colleges and our partners there, including Chanel Brumfield and Molly, and I'm going to butcher your last name, Molly, and I apologize, but Molly Cheblinik and Paige Cochran as well. And we're joined today by a couple of experts who have really been working in this space around public sector apprenticeships for some time now. I'm so pleased to have Joseph Preciado. He's the Interim Director of Workforce Development at American River College, and Melissa Fish, who's the Interim CIA Director at ARC. And then we're also joined by Oriana Mahogany, who is with San Joaquin County Engage. She is the Staff Development Coordinator, and we're going to hear from all three of them around the work that they've been doing with public sector apprenticeship and how they're really advancing this push. And then I actually really want to get into this. I think it's super interesting considering that this, especially in this space of COVID, of a changing economy that is in flux, employers who are starting to come back online, and hopefully that's able to continue, to see how the public sector is responding to all of these changes as it relates to apprenticeship, and what things look like both now, where these three have really helped bring apprenticeship in the public sector space, and what's on the horizon for the coming months and beyond. So with that, I want to first turn this conversation over to Joseph to give us an introduction of American River College. Joseph?
Hi, thank you, Caleb, and good afternoon, everybody. I see a number of familiar names in the participant list, so I'll go ahead and jump right in. What I'll start by doing is just kind of share a kind of contextualize where we are at now based on where we've been. So I'll give a little bit of a historical perspective of American River College, more specifically our apprenticeship programs and within our workforce development office. And so I welcome any questions, of course, and like I said, like Caleb mentioned in the chat, and so feel free to let us know what questions you have, or if anything that we share you'd like us to dive a little bit deeper into. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, a little bit of historical perspective. American River College has a number of years of experience working with our traditional building and construction trades programs. Those include the carpenters, ironworkers, electricians, plumbers and pipe fitters, sheet metal, recently elevators. You know, what we've done as an LEA, a local education agency, is really taken a regional approach. And so the number of, with those partners that I mentioned, we at the college serve anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 apprentices in a given year, again, within the building and construction trades programs. And this is one of the largest, we have one of the largest programs in that sector in the state. I think we're maybe second to LA Trade Tech down in Southern California. And you know, I think that's important to mention because a lot of the tenets of what we found to be successful in those programs we've applied towards partnering with the public sector in some of our CAI programs and grant projects. And you know, amongst those include, you know, staying actively engaged. I think one of the things that we hear regularly from our partners is the importance of being actively but also regularly engaged with them. And so you know, some of those partners the obvious connection there is with our trades partners, but also, you know, with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, being actively involved in the Joint Apprenticeship Training Committees, the JACs and JATCs, having those conversations with employers, labor representation, which is critically important in the public sector, well, in both, right? As well as, you know, I think it also goes without mentioning having that internal support within our college, right? So I like to think of these as, you know, those ones that I mentioned as kind of our external to the institution or to the college, but also having that support internally from our leadership is critically important for the success of our programs. We're always looking for mutually beneficial outcomes for everybody involved. And you know, oftentimes that results in just having some of those very candid and open conversations. And so to that end, you know, I think having open communications about what's working, what's not working, and where there may be opportunities to improve are very important. So and then also, so all of that to say that we have been fortunate that we were awarded a first round CAI in 2015. And then we actually submitted an unsuccessful pre-apprenticeship proposal in 2017. And then again, we were successful in securing CAI grants in 2018 and 2019 in financial services, computer science, as well as Z systems or mainframe computing. And those latter three that I mentioned are in partnership with the state of California and SEIU Local 1000. Next slide, please. So in terms of our future orientation, you know, I think that's important to, as I said, that, and then maybe there's a few bullets there on this slide. Perfect. So thanks. So in terms of industry concentration, economic, community, political outlook, I think that it's very important, and all of you know this if you're a CAI grantee, that it's really critical, particularly for CAI, but also just in general, that we're using data-driven approaches and utilizing labor market data, not only because it's required as part of the CAI, but also it really tells you a lot about your region, if you are either new to your region or you're just trying to get a better sense and grounding. We utilize data from an organization that's called the Centers of Excellence here in Sacramento. And they really are putting out labor market data at a regional level, regional and local level. And so again, it's important to look at that data, and I may be preaching to the choir here, but I think it's important to mention that because ultimately in everything that we do, we like to make sure that we are following trends and trying to identify where where those opportunities may be. In Sacramento, we've traditionally, amongst other things, been known as traditionally a government town, and so nearly half of the employment sector here is in public service, and so again, and in state government in particular. So that certainly is part of the impetus, and when we were looking at where there might be opportunities to develop new and innovative apprenticeship programs in our region. So was again looking at some of those larger employers and where there may be opportunity to partner, as well as again leveraging our existing relationships and partnerships. I think we have another resource availability, right? So in terms of resource availability, I think it's important to mention, and actually if you could advance even one more bullet for programming result, I kind of want to talk about these in tandem, resource availability and programming results, because I think the point here is that our programs certainly do not operate in a vacuum, and so which we'll get into this in a little bit, but certainly the impact on our programs at a program level, there are ripple effects from when we can see things that are happening at a national level or national policy decisions, statewide and local politics, or collective bargaining processes, and certainly now in this pandemic era that we're in, that certainly has an impact on the programs that we have and how we operate our programs, how we shift and pivot when necessary, and I think we've done a successful job so far. But it's a constant work in progress. I think it's important to say too that in terms of workforce investment and resources, this is politically as I like to call it, a very purple issue, and what I mean by that certainly is that whether whatever side of the aisle you're on, or whatever your political sway may be, certainly workforce investment is something that everybody can get behind. I think it's also important, though, to mention that, and particularly within the context of CAI, that diversification and program scalability are really important. And so what I mean by that is again, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but it's very important to ensure that you're looking kind of at the big picture as well as how that plays out on a micro and those micro and macro levels, and then ultimately down the road, once the life of these CAI grants expire or sunset, how are we scaling, and what are we doing at a local level and with our partners to ensure that the program is scalable and sustainable beyond the life of the grant. And then lastly, I'll mention just too that one of the strategies that we've done in terms of our programming for new and innovative apprenticeship within the public sector is look at opportunities for employment scaffolding. And so what I mean by that is where our existing programs have been focused on within the public sector targeting incumbent state employees and incumbent public service employees, that it's very important, I think, that we look at how those scaffolding models work, where if we're targeting specific employees for advancement, again looking at opportunities for where those vacancies may be, and then again how do we structure our programs in ways that we're serving our existing apprentices as well as creating more additional opportunities for folks down the road. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to my colleague Melissa Fish, who is also with us.
Very good. Thank you very much. So as Joseph indicated, our exploration around using public sector employees was pretty in-depth, but it seemed pretty logical just based on where we're at. So what we have learned, or what I'd like to present next, are not only the considerations that we had in making the decision to invest with public sector, but also what we have learned from that experience, both on the positive and potentially some troublesome areas, or some areas to be aware of as you go into this. So first, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the benefits. What we have determined, or what we have been able to identify at first benefit, is this idea of leveraging some infrastructure, not only on the public sector side, but on our educational institution as well. For the public sector, and using their HR departments, they have the capacity really to provide us existing positions, or with minimal rework, create these areas of opportunity for apprenticeship training and development roles, where they can receive the on-the-job structure in a qualified status. So within California HR, they have a completely identified or specialized entity or role for employees, which is called a training development role. And that really fit well with this idea of apprenticeship, because what they do is take potential opportunities within different entities or agencies for the state, and allow those individuals to be plugged in and secured in those jobs, to receive training and to be participants in the apprenticeship program. They also have in their HR repertoire the ability to have recruitment procedures, selection procedures. They also obviously have then the supports for employees at that level or within the program. And so it was very useful, and it has been very useful for us to be able to tap into the idea of, performance reviewing and communication between supervisors and apprentices. And what does the structure of the on-the-job training look like, and making sure that we're creating identifiable processes and protocols to support the learning that's done on the job. So we're able to tap into that infrastructure that exists through the HR model for the state. Then from our perspective at ARC, by having larger entity like the state to be able to have a full cohort of individuals come through, we can create a cohort at American River College to then offer dedicated courses to the apprentices. So they are all in the class together, they're hearing the same messages, they're learning the same material, and then they also are able to then lean on one another. And that really helps their academic development, as well as their confidence in their expertise, because they can also communicate about their struggles both on the job and in the classroom together. And it really does build some strong bonds and help them be successful in the program. Some other things that we can leverage then through the cohort model is, of course, tapping into our academic and campus resources, as well as student support services that are available on campus, and streamline orientation models, registration, scheduling, and material procurement for them. So that really was a helpful advantage. The next benefit that we found was a large scale of opportunity. So obviously the state is a large organization. They have entities across the state, even though our current cohorts are located primarily here in Sacramento. We are looking to expand that reach. And so we see that as a potential future direction and opportunity for growth as we replicate and offer more of these types of programs. What we also find is that they roles themselves, so for example, the financial service apprenticeship that we are working with the state on has apprentices in multiple entities. So we have apprentices that work for the Franchise Tax Board. We have entities that work for EDD. We have apprentices that are working for, I just lost the other one, multiple agencies in essence, the Department of Justice. And what we're able to do is to take the competencies of the job description or the role and have them share some of the curriculum. So we are able to spread the training and the curriculum across different areas and different jobs. Even though they aren't doing the identical same jobs, they are close enough to be able to relate to one another. So in particular, some of the competency applications that we're able to develop across the board focus on soft skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, critical thinking, time management, professionalism. But then there's also some job-specific competencies, which are more foundational for each of these groups, say financial accounting background for our financial services folks, for our Z systems, or our cybersecurity. There's going to be some computer basics that will relate across the board. So that's, again, some opportunity for us to maintain or use similar curriculum, but spread it across multiple job descriptions. A third benefit that we had was stability. Certainly, right, with COVID and everything that happened, we've got unexpected interruptions that we were able to survive and kind of emerge from relatively damage-free. But there was definitely a learning curve in doing that. But the large ability of both our agency as well as the state to absorb some of these shifts because of either economic demands or the continuity of work was really key and important for us to be able to survive all of that. Fourth benefit that we have are all the support mechanisms. So as I indicated, we're leveraging the infrastructures, but we also have a lot of support that happens. HR, CalHR provides the support for the individuals on the job in their roles and responsibilities and in their management that they're receiving in their performance evaluation process and development on the job. SEIU has also been a very critical partner when it comes to support mechanisms. So the local labor union, Local 1000, has been very pivotal in helping these apprentices to communicate their issues, but also to support them in being successful and trying to troubleshoot and provide them additional resources that they might need in order to be successful, whether it's on the job or getting to the job or even getting to campus and working that way. And one of the key pieces to that support is really about the partnerships that we created. So through the JAC, we've been able to build a very strong support structure through all of the agencies involved. And then when we face something like COVID, for example, initially we had some really difficult challenges to address. Some of the apprentices had an interruption in work, so some of them did not work or did not transition right away into remote working. We had some apprentices who are actually pulled from the on-the-job training and pulled back to their old roles to help out in EDD because of all the demands that were in place. And then we eventually had a group of apprentices who did transition to remote operations. But what the benefit of all of these support mechanisms were that we were able to meet, work together, develop the strategies to ensure that there is some continuity for the apprentices, that they're able to continue to receive some on-the-job training, albeit at first it was difficult for that to happen because work processes didn't translate over, as well as the training procedures and protocols weren't translating as well. But through that communication, through that joint partnership that we developed, we were able to identify some really key solutions, have the apprentices get access to the technology and the resources that they needed to not only do the job, but to receive the support and the training that they needed to learn and continue in their program. And for those individuals who were moved out of their apprenticeship program, they were still allowed to continue with the curriculum piece and the coursework. And the intention is, and once the burden is lifted from EDD, for those individuals to transition back to the on-the-job training. So they will absolutely have that opportunity to move back. And so we really found it helpful to have all of those partners to help them continue to be able to run and participate in the apprenticeship program, which we think may not have happened if we were dealing maybe with some smaller entities or organizations that didn't have that availability. So those were the positives that we found. Some of the challenges or the negatives that we found we're facing is certainly some of the control issues. As a large public entity, of course, there are definitely some restrictions and some requirements and even regulations that we must adhere to, and we don't have control or input into even. So we have to work very closely with our Cal HR partners and SEIU to make sure that any issues that come up that fall into these areas are addressed, but in a way that serves the apprentices. In that regard too, a lot of times then, although ARC may have an opinion or some insight as the LEA about direction and ways to handle certain either curriculum or training elements, the decision ultimately is made by those public partners to meet their need or to kind of fit the model that they have to follow for consistency or their regulations and expectations. So as a result, that leads to really the second challenge, which is about flexibility. So as we are trying to meet needs for the entire state, even though we're dealing with specific agencies, the way a lot of times that the program is looked at is it looks at serving that larger role without creating inequities across the state and other institutions within the state agencies. So there's some difficulties in trying to kind of navigate that and creating some flexibility. For example, one of the challenges we felt with the role around the financial services was that, as I indicated, there are 3 different job descriptions or ONET codes, if you will, that are being addressed in the program. And we were hoping to be able to create a little bit more flexibility in some of the curriculum selections, so the course selections of what the apprentices will complete. But we, again, were outvoted or didn't have that control or that input to create that flexibility. So we're working within the boundaries that are created across the board for all of our cohorts, in apprentices in the cohort, excuse me, and doing our best to, within the courses themselves, create some flexibility to address those needs for the specific competencies of those 3 different jobs. And so as a result of that, sometimes we'll see at the end, was that curriculum too broad, or were we able to create enough customization even though we were not creating 3 separate tracks for these different job descriptions? So that remains to be seen. And under the, one of the things that did come to play though, and we did find some amount of flexibility, was when COVID hit, that there was some capability for us to make some shifts. For example, we were originally meeting all in person with the classes, and then we did transition to an online delivery model. So we are starting to see maybe some potential for that loosening up. So we'll keep tabs on that as well. Our third challenge was about consistency and execution. Consistency and just kind of like support and making sure that things were going through, because what we ended up falling a little bit victim to was the priorities and the initiatives that were happening across the state, either within state agencies or either politically or just what's happening for the state and the public institution. For example, to the cybersecurity, we're having, to navigate some changes that are happening statewide, not only to curriculum, but for, things that have come out of COVID and things we have to adjust for there. Finding access to the agencies has been an issue too. So the consistency and the execution piece, excuse me, is our ability to gain access to different agencies. There is kind of a bit of a gateway through CalHR, which is worked well, but doesn't always maybe give us the flexibility that we would like to see, or the speed that we can implement some of these programs too. And so we'll look to address those as we move forward. And then there are just some consistency and execution issues on our side too. As a learning institution, there is some proposed curriculum changes that we're seeing. And so with our changes, how does that translate and impact what the state agreed to? Because once we have those agreements and the set structure for the RSI, there's been some willingness to change and be flexible around that, but there's been some pushback about making those changes as well. So we just have to be sensitive and figure out how to best to handle that. And then the last one is the last challenge that we're facing, as I indicated a little bit, was the political and bureaucratic changes. And I think Joseph had an example that he wanted to share about that.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So I think, this is one of the challenges that we faced back when we were in the process of launching our financial services apprenticeship program, is something, and I mentioned this earlier, is that, often there are ripple effects and these programs don't exist in a vacuum. And so one example in particular was the Supreme Court Janus decision, which if you're not familiar with, essentially Janus was about a fair share and essentially who, if for example, if you do not opt, if you're part of a union and you do not opt to pay union dues, you may still be represented by that union or by that labor organization within the broader collective bargaining environment. And so I share this example because ultimately what happened, and I apologize if I'm kind of truncating the description of what happened in Janus, or leaving out any critical pieces, but I think what was important to mention is because it's important to mention this because ultimately, when we talk about, or if you are considering working with a public organization, or even if it's not a public organization, if they're represented by a union through some type of labor contract, it's important to recognize that who is represented and whether or not those individuals on an individual level are represented by the union, and then ultimately what does that mean for participation within an apprenticeship program. I think what we found that we have again, in the key for our success here was working very closely with our labor partners. And so ultimately trying to identify, okay, well, now that we have this decision that's kind of given us additional insight and perspective on what it means to be represented and ultimately what that means for participating in an apprenticeship program. I think it's really important to understand that like COVID or like Janus, that these things will come up that again, you sometimes have no control over, and that's okay. It's really more about, I think, identifying how the political environment and context shapes, influences, impacts, or has some type of have ripple effect on what it is that you're doing. And again, I think it just speaks to the ability to and the importance of being flexible, being nimble, and kind of rolling with these issues that come up that, again, you may sometimes have no control over, but are, need to be able to work with them and around them, with your partners, to be able to find actionable and successful solutions. I think maybe the next slide, please. So again, I think that leads us into a little bit about lessons learned, and we've covered a little bit of this already. But just in terms of control, I think it's important to remember, and if you go in to look at any of the documentation around apprenticeship, whether it's on the new and innovative side or the traditional building and construction trade side, one of the things that you'll see is that program, and you'll hear this from DAS or also the the Federal Division of Labor, the DOL. Is that really, the employer has to have buy-in, right? And the employer, for good reason, should have control over what that program looks like. And in this case, when we talk about control, it's about, what is it? What are the employer's needs? How do those needs translate to, protecting employees through, whether it's, again, if they're represented by a union, in this case, in our programs, SEIU Local 1000. And again, ultimately, what does that mean for what is the role of the LEA, and how do you negotiate those relationships in that environment, so that, again, you have mutually beneficial outcomes for everybody, and that control and that input is shared and valued by everybody who's at the table, if it's in, and literally at the table, right in a JAC meeting, and or in that type of environment. In that sense too, and we'll go to the next bullet here, if you will, is making sure that we have champions. And I mentioned this at the top of the conversation, but I'll just underscore it a little bit more again, is that, it's important to have champions, even from the get-go. I'll call out a couple of folks that were really instrumental for us at the very beginning. Those folks being Helen Dowden, Sarah McGinn, Ken Anyanwu, who really helped to champion this program and really to get us an audience with some of these state agencies. So I recall having a number of conversations with different directors of state agencies, and explaining, sitting around a table and really explaining to them, the value of the program, what it was intended to do. It certainly helps that we have a governor who has a very ambitious goal of a number of apprentices by 2029. I think I don't want to quote the number because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but the goal, again, is ambitious. And again, in order to get there, we have to have champions for these programs, whether it's from the employer perspective, union perspective, or even, as I said, from within our college. 500,000, thank you. I see, but thanks, Linda. So 500,000 apprentices by 2029, I believe. Somebody else can maybe help me with that and correct me on that if that's off. But in any case, again, buy-in is critical, and having champions for that is going to be very important for our program as well as all of yours. Next bullet, please. So execution, again, in some, Melissa mentioned this already, and I think it goes without saying that in order to execute any of these programs, I think there's something else that I haven't mentioned, but I think that's really been successful for us, is that anytime, because we at American River College are the LEA for the program, it's really incumbent upon us, and what we found, and both Melissa and I and our other colleagues, John and Connie, have found that it's really important for us to take the lead on helping folks to understand what the goals of the grants are, and how we can work, again, towards those outcomes and results that ultimately we're all trying to reach in order for the program to be successful. So one of the things that we've done, and just in terms of execution and accountability for that, is as the grantee, anytime that we work with any of our partners and there's a financial relationship involved, we always ask, and this is really more in the weeds of what we do, but ultimately we put together a statement of work and we develop a contract, and that's just really important, because at any point, if we want to look back, and if anybody wants to look back and say, okay, what is it that we were hoping to accomplish, and did we get there? I think part of execution And in that spirit of accountability is having that document that you can refer back to. But also I think it speaks to just in general, the importance of iterative program design. You know, these are new programs and we're not always going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. But understanding how, what worked and what didn't, so that we can then infuse that information, infuse that feedback back into the program, so that we can correct and you know, in some cases it's a little bit like driving the car as you build it, or flying the plane, you know, as you build it, so to speak. It can be a little bit scary, but that's okay. You know, I think again, it's understanding and having that trust that that everybody's there for the same reason, to see the program be successful, and then again to work towards those common goals that everyone has there.
And so if we go to the next slide, then the last two things, I'm going to try and make this real quick so we can get to Oriana, because she's got some great things to provide too from the employer's perspective, is that, you know, the relationship piece, as Joseph has indicated, I think you've said this plenty of times, is key. And so having those great partners through the state, through whatever public entity, and through SEIU, our local 1000, has been very pivotal for our success, and I think for the success of the apprentices as well. And then the second thing that has been truly beneficial for this program for us through ARC is the cohort model, and having those built-in supports, and having the apprentices kind of feel secure and have that network available to them. So as we build our program and look to our future, and we look to developing this apprenticeship program online and to expand our reach, we're going to try and figure out how we can build that cohort model into the future as well, through our Z systems, when Connie is working on that and trying to help her folks get through the program. But we see that as going to be another critical piece to us moving forward. So with that, I'll pass it back to Caleb so that we can move on.
Thanks so much, Joseph and Melissa. And yeah, I really do just want to call out, like, I appreciate, especially Joseph, your last point about the documentation to learn and the iterative process. And also just kind of magnify it also, you know, by doing those sort of documentation pieces, it also allows you to provide learnings for the larger system and for other partners and people that are in spaces that are trying to follow some of the pathways that you've laid down as well. And so I really appreciate that last point in particular. So let me turn it to Oriana as well. I know Oriana has had not only some exquisite employer perspective on working with San Joaquin County, but then also she has done some work with IACA as well. So Oriana, let me turn it to you. And just remind folks, if they have questions along the way, to drop them into chat. And if we don't get to them this afternoon, we'll be able to follow up through the community of practice. Oriana.
Great, thanks, Caleb. So really excited to be here. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to jump on today to learn a little bit more about apprenticeship and about some of the things that are being offered out there right now. We're really excited at San Joaquin County to have partnered with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards in trying to meet that hefty goal that you know, Governor Newsom really has tried to push forward an agenda to get those 500,000 apprenticeships done by 2029. But one of the key things about that I think that is really important to note is that he really wants these to be inventive apprenticeships, right? We already have many apprenticeships within some of our other industries, but we really want to be thinking about how can we go beyond that to create apprenticeships in arenas that don't typically offer them. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And on this, we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the, like, what is an incumbent apprenticeship? There are different types of apprenticeship programs. You can have apprenticeship programs that are offered for individuals that are just out there in the community interested in applying for apprenticeships. You have students. We're working on a high school apprenticeship program currently within San Joaquin County with our Office of Education to try and create apprenticeship programs. But the apprenticeship program that San Joaquin County has currently started is an incumbent apprenticeship program. So we looked at our current employees and we decided we wanted to create something to be able to bring our employees into a state of employment where they really are starting to financially benefit and grow within the county. So that formal employment program combines education and on-the-job training. One of the first things that I felt it was important for people to understand when I was advocating for our program was to really identify and outline the differences between what an apprenticeship is versus other types of things like internships or mentorships or even volunteerism. I think that there is this misguided understanding of what an apprenticeship truly is. And I think that first and foremost, you need to define what the apprenticeship is and then figure out what type of apprenticeship you're looking to create in your organization. The biggest thing that I would say about an apprenticeship is that it has to be something where your paid wages that move as you move through their program align with the entry-level salary for the classifications that you're working towards achieving. For our particular program, we did an information systems division, an IT program for our very first apprenticeship. And this is a pilot program that we launched earlier this year that we are hoping to grow into other classifications later on. So you can go ahead and change to the next slide. For our local education agency partnership, we partnered with San Joaquin Delta College, which is they've been amazing partners in trying to launch this program. One of the good things about apprenticeships is that when you're first starting out, you want to be thinking about multiple things. What classification makes the most sense? What's an easy sort of low-hanging fruit that's going to let me get through a program so that it's successful, but one that you don't have to put in a lot of work into. So when we went for the IT program and we worked with San Joaquin Delta College, we saw that there was already a certificate program for information technology that would coincide with some of the expectations and minimum qualifications and minimum industry standards for that particular classification for our organization. So our participants will leave with the customer support technician certificate and can continue to move on to getting their associate's degree or transferring to a 4-year college if that's what they choose. But it really is trying to give people an opportunity to sort of grow their career in a field that they're interested in while getting paid those wages that are higher than they would be making in their typical roles. You can move on to the next one. And then go ahead and move on. So ours is a 3-year incumbent apprenticeship program. So in year 1, staff would attend the courses with San Joaquin Delta College. We were very fortunate that in our program model, in year 1, we really focused it on just the education component. So while COVID-19 has taken people back in what they are trying to do and having to find all of these alternative methods, we were fortunate in that our program started where our students were just attending school. And because the school education piece shifted to online classes, it was an easy transition because there wasn't any on-the-job training in that first year. The reason that we chose to do that in that first year was we really wanted to make sure that our employees were committed to the program before we made further financial investments on them being able to get paid those higher wages when they're in the on-the-job training portion. So in year 1, staff are attending courses at the college, and we are actually paying them for the hours that they're in attendance for school. In year 2, they are also paid for attendance in school, plus they do their on-the-job training. And during those on-the-job training hours, we give them a supplement to their current salary if they're paid at a lower salary. If they're paid higher than what that the amount would be for an apprentice at that classification, then their salary just remains flat and they're paid the same. But if they're paid less, then they get a stipend amount for the hours of on-the-job work. And then in year 3, we take them fully off of their role, where in year 2, they're currently doing part of their actual job, so they keep their classification, right? With civil service, it's a very different ballgame. You have to have, there's all of these different rules around what you can do with employees. And so in order to maintain their current status and keep them in their classification, they stay in their current classification for those 3 years. And so in year 2, part of their time is done in class and on the job training, and part of their time is done in their current classification doing their current role. In year 3, they're completely taken out of the work of their current role, and they work more on the job training while attending school, but they still keep their classification. So ultimately, their job is held for them during this 3 years while they're in this program, in case for whatever reason they don't finish the program, or they decide that they're no longer interested in that field, or if there are no jobs available for them to transition into those roles at the end of it. So go ahead and switch to the next slide. So at the end of the 3 years, they're eligible to compete for the opportunity for any vacancies that are available. Now, most likely there will always be those vacancies, which is why we choose these classifications, right? But there may be things that are just out of our control, budget constraints, COVID-19, reasons that just come about that we're not able to add those positions. And so as program participants, they also have the added advantage that they've been in that department. They're working hands on hand with the individuals that are within that department, and they're then able to sort of have those relationships to where if I'm applying for a job, it gives me an added bonus knowing that you know that I know what I'm doing. If there are no eligible vacancies, they would just assume their pre-apprenticeship role. So like I said, it's important for us, and it was important for our labor organization that we were working with in this situation was SEIU 1021, that we maintained that the employees were still able to revert back to their current roles, and that joining this program wouldn't be a hindrance on their future employment if something wasn't available in this field. Go ahead and go to advance to the next slide, please. So there was definitely an approval process that had to happen. The first thing is getting buy-in and authorization for the program to even take flight, right? We at San Joaquin County are very fortunate that all of our Board of Supervisors really not just acknowledged this program, but they advocated for it. So it was initially one of our board members who really put this into the area that of we want to get this done. And so I think that there is something about having that commitment. And when we think about all the way up to Gavin Newsom, right? Governor Newsom is saying, this is something that we want to do. We need to really be focused on these apprenticeships. Having that buy-in is so key and crucial. And then from there, we really had to just work on submitting applications and backup and everything to the Division of Apprenticeship Standards. We simultaneously did this with the U.S. Department of Labor. So we are not just a state program, but we're also a federally approved program. And it's a little bit more work, but honestly, at the end of the day, I would much rather have something that covers all bases. So our employees, if they decide to leave later on and move anywhere across the United States, should be able to meet those minimum standards, not just on a state level, but on a federal level as well. So we went through a candidate selection process, and one of the things that we did in our initial process was I met with and did like a 10-15 minute quick interview with every single applicant who applied, and then from there we made the pool a little bit smaller, and then from there we made it smaller still. We met with our LEA to go over all of the program plans, and then we've been working really closely with our subcommittee and the employee departments to follow the participants through the completion of the program and just cycling back to hopefully be able to do another one next year, actually. So go ahead and advance. Our program is through San Joaquin County. And that's just our civil service incumbent apprenticeship program, our one little lonely program that has 3 current participants. One of the reasons that we chose 3 participants was because I absolutely wanted to ensure that there was a cohort attached to it, that you had somebody who was experiencing the same sort of thing that you're doing, who's going through the same sort of, whether it's taking the classes or family life challenges or work-life balance challenges, somebody that you would really be able to have conversations with and that would advocate with and for you as you move through the program and just helping to cheerlead through success. And so, so it's been great having that, and the camaraderie between our 3 participants is just more. I couldn't have asked for a better team to be going through this pilot piece. But one of the things that we really were able to do was utilize what we've done at San Joaquin County and help to support the focus that's happening at the Interagency Advisory Committee on Apprenticeships. So through the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, they've created this interagency committee that has broken themselves out into other committees so that we can focus on specific things that are either barriers to or you know, identifying some of the key apprenticeship classifications that should happen throughout the state of California. So it's really just being able to lend our voice on the civil service arena. So Joseph and I both sit on the Civil Service Commission for IACA, on the Civil Service Committee for IACA, which essentially we are there to try and identify what are some of the low-hanging fruit classifications that we can create minimum industry standards that can be rubber stamped throughout all of California to make it a lot easier for organizations, particularly those in civil service, to jump in and say, okay, I want to utilize this program. It's already written out for me. All I have to do is really just make the investment and commitment to create the program. But we are a brand new committee, and so as we move forward, it does take time. But I think that this committee, the commitment from the committee members and just the enthusiasm around it really is exciting to see that this could become a possibility in trying to meet that lofty 500,000 goal that Governor Newsom has for us on creating these classifications. The other thing, like I said in the beginning, was the biggest piece is really trying to think through what are some of those classifications that are high need that aren't currently in as apprenticeships, and what can we do to try and broaden that. So we're looking at industries like IT, right? There's a lot in cybersecurity with COVID-19. A lot of people now are working remotely. And so what does that look like? What does that mean? Do we want to be thinking about apprenticeships in information systems now in a different way? There's a lot around finance. And so we're really just trying to make sure that we're creating those minimum industry standards, identifying some of the classifications and starting to just build on some of those classifications to eventually have a long library list where you can say, hey, I'm interested in this program, and the information is already there. So there's a lot of preliminary work being done, but still a whole lot to go. You can advance to the next slide. The one thing that I would say for anybody on here that has any power to make decisions on whether or not you should start one of these programs, I am a huge advocate for these programs because I think that all it does is betters either your individual employees or the community at large by offering these types of roles where people are able to obtain a livable wage while working and attending school. And it's just a big combination of goodness that there's really not many negatives, if any, from these programs. But the thing that I would say is if you're serious about the program, you have to resource it. It is time consuming in the beginning, a lot more than it is once you have your program up and going, but it is time consuming on both ends either way. It's a job in and of itself, so it does take time to get your program off the ground and then to maintain it once it's there, because you want to always be fresh and you want to always refresh and think about what the next best classification is or what you can do to improve your internal programs. And then passion about the program is important. I think that it's like a labor of love, right? It's one of those things where you really have to be passionate about the idea of advancing individuals within your community. And it's just one of those sort of feel-good programs where you're offering people opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And so you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. I think that might be about it for me. But one of the things that I would say about our program before I just pass it back is that we were really clear from the beginning that we wanted to eliminate any barriers or hurdles through our program. So we have our staff members are able to attend class, and those hours that they attend class, they're paid their current salary for attending class. And so they're able to do that during work hours. And that was key. When you think about what are some of the hurdles and challenges of people being able to go back to school, it's all about the fact that, you know, I get home from work and I have my real life to attend after work and I don't have time to attend classes. There is still the piece of homework and testing and all that stuff that comes, and studying, all the stuff that comes after class time, but taking away just that one barrier of class time that you're able to do during work whilst getting paid, more people are going to be interested in a program where you're helping to eliminate some of those barriers that people often face when trying to get into these programs. But I think that's all I have, so I'm open for any questions.
Yeah, that's great, Oriana, and I thank you so much. And I know that we're actually just past the 2:30 time, so I know we're at our limit. I did see one question that came over chat from Sarah McGinn that was actually for you, Oriana, that was asking about any barriers that you had to issuing stipends through civil service rules or others. What I'm going to do, it sounds like, Oriana, you have a minute or two. So I'm going to let you answer that, and we'll keep recording. Folks that have to hop off, we will post this. So it'll go just a little bit past the hour. And then if we have additional questions, please put them into chat, and we're going to follow up through the hub. They will be posted there, responses will be posted there, so you can find them. But Oriana, do you want to respond to that one question?
Absolutely. So the barriers with issuing the stipend, our program had to be approved by the Board of Supervisors as a whole. And so one of the things that went through that approval process was funds being distributed through the general funds, right? And part of that was the in-class payment hours for those staff members and the additional stipend. So that's coming from general funds as opposed to coming out of any particular budget department. For the stipend itself, the above class hours actually are being paid though through the department. So that would be the IT department paying for those above class hours for hours that they're getting the on-the-job training, because they are in fact still doing work for on-the-job training. So that department helps to pay that. There wasn't too big of an issue other than just creating that additional supplement to pay for their salary, and trying to come up with the difference of what that pay would be like wasn't very difficult either, because the way that our salary scale works at like a 5% increase per year. So we were able to just do the math backwards and figure out what those numbers would look like under that classification after a 3-year program. And we were able to put that supplemental pay on as an hourly amount, an hourly supplement to their current salary for the on-the-job training hours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Oriana. I really appreciate that follow-up. And I want to extend a thank you to Joseph and Melissa as well for giving us some insights. Again, and just as a final reminder for folks that didn't get to ask questions or had something, or you find something later, we have our emails up here. You're certainly welcome to reach out to any of us, Oriana, Joseph, or Melissa. You can also reach out to myself if you have more technical assistance questions or more general questions about the CAI as well, and we can certainly connect you. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a really wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.